Thursday live, here we are, ready for some Q and some A. Hopefully I've got some A for you. I don't always have the answer, but I think I'm very good at saying when I don't have the answer. So it's as long as I've been doing this, you folks manage to stump me every once in a while. So a couple things. One, as always, thanks to Typebond for sponsoring this and keeping this as a free event for you folks. And then also I mentioned this morning when we did our live stream, we're in the midst of spring, which means sitting on the deck, barbecue season is here, if not here, right around the corner. And you want to be a hero for your next barbecue, so you should show up with a bottle opener. And we've got a pretty cool plan. It's just down a little bit on the page. Look for where it says DIY bottle opener, I think is what it is. And when you find that, click it, and then you can get a plan that you can download. So like I said, you can be the hero for the next barbecue that you go to. I was just recently in Connecticut at the, if you've not seen it before, the Connecticut Valley School of Woodworking. What a cool spot. Bob Van Dyke runs that. I taught there for 4 days, 3 different classes over a 4-day period. All the classes were full. That was cool. What a nice spot. If you're anywhere near Manchester, Connecticut, you should look up the Connecticut Valley School of Woodworking, and you can just explore that online and see what kind of classes Bob has offered. I believe I will be back there again in the fall. We haven't nailed any dates down yet, but just watch his website and we'll see what happens. It was a very nice spot. Lots of questions on here already. So without further ado, let's jump in. Norman asks, how do you put a bottom in a box made with finger joints? So I think what Norman is potentially up against here, I think the reason he's asking this question is if we take 4 pieces that have finger joints cut in them, and we just go to a dado head or a router table and we run a groove through those pieces, that groove is, in all likelihood, going to show on the outside of the box on 2 of the sides. So there's a couple ways that you could do this. I have in my hot little hands, this is not a finger joint, it's a through dovetail, but the idea is the same. What we're up against is that each component of the joint goes through the other face. In a half blind dovetail, it's a little easier to hide the groove for the bottom. So when you have this kind of a joint, one approach would be glue the box together. After the glue is dry, you could use a rabbiting router bit, and with the ball bearing of the router bit running on the inside face, you could cut a rabbet in the bottom of the box. Because the box has already been put together, that's going to leave it blind. That's going to leave it where you can't see it from the outside of the box. If you want it to be a groove in the sides rather than a rabbet on the bottom edge of the sides, the way you can do that, let me tap that apart. And then I think I shall bring you to the other camera for this. Whether it's a through dovetail like this or a, what we just talked about, a finger joint, what we can do is position the groove so it's in line with this socket. In this spot right here, I would make the groove. I'm looking to see if I have a white pencil. I don't. I would make the groove so that it's centered on this socket. Then when we make the mating groove in this piece, you have to stop it. So the groove would start a little bit in from the end of that tail, and then it would go all the way through just short of the end of the other tail. Easiest way to do that is on a router table. We would do that by approaching the bit, plunge over the top of it, move forward to a stop, lift off, so that you're not cutting all the way through. Because see what I mean here? If we just run it all the way through on all 4 pieces, when we put this together, that groove would show right there. So in this piece, in the piece with the socket, we can all the way through. On this piece with the finger, or in this case, the dovetail, we need to stop it short of the end grain, and that'll leave it blind. Or like I said, as an alternative, you could glue the whole box together and then use a rabbiting router bit and cut a rabbet in the bottom edge of all four pieces after the box is put together. Williams says, what's an efficient way to remove shellac from a large quantity of recycled mahogany lumber? Boy, it sounds like an interesting project. Large quantity of mahogany that's got shellac on it. Kind of cool. So shellac dissolves readily. I'm not sure that's going to be your best approach for this because it's just going to kind of melt it into the surface. It dissolves with denatured alcohol very readily. I think sanding is going to be your thing. So if these are flat planks, then sending them through a drum sander or a wide belt sander would probably be the most efficient way to do it. Mike asks, heavy duty router speed control devices are available on the market? Question mark. Are available on the market? They are. Have you ever used one? Do they work? Can they cause damage to a router? So what Mike is asking about is, I've seen these things. It looks like a dimmer switch in your house, but it's got a plug in it, and you plug it into a wall. Then you plug your router into the plug, and when the router is on and I turn this dimmer switch, I'm increasing or decreasing the speed of the router. The little bit that I know about this is that it can adversely affect the router. Clearly, variable speed routers are made. So with a variable speed router, when the manufacturer kicks that product out, it knows it's designed the motor such that it can run at a high RPM, it can run at a low RPM, and it's going to be sufficiently cooled, and all the stuff it needs for longevity is going to happen. With these, my understanding is you're now running a router at a low RPM that wasn't really designed to be cutting at a low RPM, and that could have an adverse effect on the motor. Does that mean it's going to last 1 hour? Does that mean it's going to last 10 years instead of 20 years? I don't know. But I think net, you're better off getting a purpose-built router, and a router with EVS, electronic variable speed, and letting that control the router the way it's supposed to. The other thing that we typically get with EVS is what's called soft start, which means when you initially turn the router on, it ramps up to speed slowly. It doesn't go from 0 to 24,000 RPM just like that. Soft start is great at preventing the router from kind of jerking in your hands. Makes it a little bit better router experience, a little bit safer to use because it's not popping so hard. So there's a lot of good stuff that comes with EVS as well. What is the most efficient method for sanding juice grooves? Maybe surf prep sander with a pinched foam pad that fits in a 1/4 inch juice groove. Sanding by hand with paper wrapped around a hard foam profile cannot be the best method. So I've put juice grooves in a bunch of boards. If this is something you want to do, we've got a video on WWGOA.com about how to put juice grooves into cutting boards. When I do this, I'm doing it with a fixed base router in a couple of passes with a core box, a rounded bit, and I have never sanded a juice groove. So I would back up the truck a little bit and say, work on your approach to doing this. Make sure you're doing multiple passes. And I'm going to say, I don't know, with a 1/2 inch core box bit, maybe I'm taking off a 1/16 of an inch per pass over 3 passes. you can always make that last pass really light so that you can keep moving. But it's definitely not leaving burns in the juice groove, and it's definitely not leaving any kind of mill marks. As an alternative to that, I will describe a thing for you, which is making a custom sanding block. So I'm thinking for a second, I don't think I have anything laying around that I can use it as an example, but you can make a custom sanding block by take a piece of wax paper, lay it over an existing juice groove, then get Bondo, auto body filler, mix it according to the directions, and on the wax paper, pack the Bondo down into the profile that you're trying to make a custom sander for. I have done this a lot with raised panel doors, are a great example. So push the Bondo down in, let it cure the appropriate amount of time. When it's dry, when it's cured, take it out, peel off the wax paper, and then you can put a piece of self-adhesive sandpaper onto that profile that you created, which, because you pushed it into the juice groove, has to perfectly match the juice groove. That's going to give you a sanding block to go all the way down the long sides. The corners, you're just going to have to do those by hand as best you can. But again, where I started with this, if it were me, I would work hard on technique and try to get to where you don't have to sand. Light passes, keep the router bit moving, make sure it's sharp. And in my case, with juice grooves and cutting boards, I have never had to sand. Jonathan asked, what's the best way to construct melamine cabinet carcass with rabbets or butt joint together and attached with screws? Yes and yes. I've done it both ways. My conventional cabinet building technique is cut dados, cut rabbets, put parts together, put glue in the dados, glue in the rabbets, Bob's your uncle. When I was a production manager of a commercial cabinet shop for a long time, and we built miles and miles and miles of melamine cabinets, miles and miles and miles of melamine cabinets. In that case, we did everything with butt joints and screws. And those cabinets lasted still today. They lasted forever. So you want to make sure you're using a melamine-friendly screw. Screws that go into party board products typically have a little bit deeper threads. They've got some other stuff going on. You want to make sure you're using the right screw for the job. But either one of those approaches will work and be an effective way to put melamine carcasses together. Paul says, oh, wait, I'm going to skip one. Michael says, could you cover a finger joint box with the easy mode if there is any to making finger joints? Could you cover a finger joint box with the easy mode if there is any to making finger? I think what the question is about is an easy way to make finger joints. What I would do if I were you, Michael, is go on WWGOA.com, and at the top there's a little magnifying glass. A thing that looks like a magnifying glass. Click that, type in finger joints, and David Radke is a contributor who did a lot of writing, a lot of videos for me. He has got an article, he's got a project in which he uses finger joints, for which he's also got a finger joint chip. The other thing you could do is look at Rockler.com. They have got a router table based finger joint I've used. That works pretty well. So that would get you, there's two options for ways to set up and do finger joints. Paul says, lately I've discovered the beauty of filling rotten knot holes, knots pared out obviously, with epoxy. How do you proceed with finishing this when the area filled with epoxy is relatively small and the tools used to sand and polish will inevitably go over the wood and the epoxy? Does all the fine sanding and polishing affect the wood? Will this part of the project end up different from the rest once the finish is applied? So what we're talking about here is a scenario where there's a defect, a void, or something in the wood that's been filled with epoxy. But what you've really got is a really large field. You've got this workbench top that's primarily wood and a little spot where you've used epoxy. The way to deal with that is you just sand everything like you're sanding the wood, and then you finish everything like you're finishing the wood. You sand right over the material, the wood, you sand over the epoxy, you apply finish to everything, and then you're going to be done. One caveat I got to that from the epoxy company was people feel like when there's an epoxy pocket in the middle of the tabletop that they need to really polish that epoxy before they finish everything. You don't want to do that. It is, at the end of the day, plastic. If you overly polish it, if you get it really, really smooth, finish won't stick to it. You could, as a result, end up with a spot that finish won't adhere and it flakes off of it, sloughs off later, only from that epoxy spot. So it's just sand everything to your normal sanding grit, and then when that's done, put finish over everything, and you'll be set. Marcy asks, hello, what is the best method of cleaning drill bits, router bits after each use? So a couple things there. One would be, unless you're working with really sappy pine, I don't think you should have to do it after every use. However, when you need to clean, a couple things here. I've seen a lot of cases where people think they need to sharpen their router bits or table saw blades, but what they really need to do is just clean them. And what happens there is that you can get so much resin alongside the cutting surface, there's no longer clearance for the cutter to go past the work. So you might be getting burning, and it's actually sap, resin, that's rubbing against your material, not that you have a dull blade. So cleaning frequently is good, but not necessarily after every use. I use Simple Green. So that stuff does a really amazing job of cleaning. Spritz it on, let it sit for a second, and it doesn't take much. You'll have it clean in no time, maybe a little bit of gentle brushing. I really like this thing. This is a micro jig product specifically for cleaning blades and router bits. So it's got a couple different aspects here. When I open this up, you'll see. So that is full of Simple Green right now. There's basically a Scotch-Brite pad in the bottom. I can put a saw blade in there, and then I can take this handle that's got magnets on it, put them on the blade, and you got to make that sound. Flip it over, do the same thing to the other face, and that'll clean a saw blade in no time. Then there's a well in the middle. I can also fill that with Simple Green. That gives me a spot to soak stuff. It comes with, a brass brush. You can use that to gently rub the teeth of a saw blade, the cutters on a router bit. So this as a system is a really nice way. I'm going to argue with that later. This is a really nice way to keep your cutting tools clean. And then all self-contained, so the Simple Green just stays in there, and I'm ready to go next time. So again, Micro Jig is the company. Blade Clean. Blade Clean is the name of the product. Gary says, Any tricks for installing piano hinges on a box? Can't seem to get it lined up just right. My piano hinges can be a big pain to work with. They're can be very difficult to line up. The screws are tiny. There's lots of stuff going on. When I use a piano hinge, one thing I do is I get it where I think it needs to be, and I install as few hinges as I possibly can in both components. Then I check my work. Then if I need to, I take those screws out and I use different holes and I try again and I try again. So what I'm doing there is I'm not committing to every hole in the piano hinge until I'm confident that it's right. So every third hole, every fourth hole, just enough to get a preliminary open and close, then go back and finish it once you know you have it. Thomas says, I'm building the miter station with the plans and video from WWGOA. I don't believe the video or PDF cover installation of the casters. Should they be mounted on a separate subframe that attaches to the carcass, or should they be installed into the plywood? Thanks. So I'm looking at the miter station right there. And yeah, I've got them just screwed to the bottom. And on the front of the cabinet, because there's a face frame on the front, a couple of the screws are in the bottom of the face frame, and a couple of the screws are in the case bottom. And on the back, they would just be in the case bottom. So yeah, the caster plates are all the way to the outside edge and front and back of the cabinet, and then just screwed into the bottom. Very dusty day in the shop today, so I'm washing that dust down. Richard says, what's the best blade for ripping a bevel in a 1x2 piece with the 1-inch face in contact with the table, so it's on edge? Bevel angle is 15 degrees. Every blade I've tried burns the wood. They all were sharp. 24 tooth rip blade, 80 tooth crosscut, and 24 tooth general purpose. All blades were Diablos. Any suggestion? Yeah, there's something else. There's something else cooking there. So an 80 tooth if you're ripping, an 80 tooth is not the choice you want. If you're ripping solid wood, if you were cutting plywood, you could get away with an 80 tooth. But if you're ripping solid wood, you want to have a 24 or 40 tooth. You do not want to have an 80 tooth in there. The gullets have to be large so they can carry the dust away. So the other thing I would point to is making sure your rip fence is parallel to the saw blade. My guess is it's pinched in a little bit. So as you get to the back of the cut, you're pushing the back of the work, the back of the angle against the back of the blade, and that's where your burring is coming from. So one thing, sort of anecdotally, you could try is cut a bevel by only entering as far as the center of the blade. So I think what you're doing is you've got a 1x2 on edge. You're feeding past the saw blade. So what I would do to try one is just cut in as far as like the center of the blade, cut in and come out, and see then how that angle looks, how that cut felt. Then the next time you do one that goes all the way through, feel for resistance as the board is getting to the back of the blade. And again, I suspect what's happening here is the tail end of your fence is kicked in a little bit. That's pushing the bevel against the blade. That's what's causing burn. So double check your fence setup and make sure it's right. Paul says, what causes board warp / twist when it is cut? For example, I've got some mahogany that upon resawing turns into a ramp for Hot Wheels. That's pretty funny. I had a lot of Hot Wheels when I was a kid. I had a lot of Hot Wheels, including the Supercharger So the little battery operated thing, you could send the car through that, and then it would go around the loop-de-loop. Crazy cool. I don't know where all that stuff is today. Is it poor harvesting, drying, acclimation, all of the above? So generally, when a board reacts as you're cutting it, it has probably been case hardened. What that means is that the inside of the board is different than the outside of the board. If you are resawing, my guess would be that you've got thicker stock. It's always harder to effectively dry thick material than thin material. So what happens is you've got different forces at play when you cut it open. A huge symptom of this is when you're ripping stuff on a table saw, and as it exits the back of the blade, it either opens up or pinches closed. Also symptoms of case hardening. So yeah, in your case, a ramp for Hot Wheels, it makes it sound like we're making the loop-de-loop thing. Then you've got material that perhaps, if it was kiln dried or air dried, I guess, it was not dried properly, and it's pretty hard to combat that. Especially if it's kiln dried, it's kind of baked in right now. But your question about also acclimatization to your shop could be a thing. So you do want to bring material in to your work environment, let it sit again, especially if it's thick, let it sit for days, a week, so it acclimates to an interior environment before you do any work with it. But yeah, generally I point my fingers at stuff that is, in this case, it's because it wasn't actually dried correctly from the start. James says, do you use wooden hinges in any of your products? How would you make dowels in a given wood species? So I did a wooden hinge once, and you can find it on the website. The project was called a handkerchief table, and the handkerchief table had a gate leg on it. So that means there's a rail, and then when you open up the leaf on the table, when you lift the leaf on the table up, you roll out that gate leg, and that's what holds the table up. That had a wooden hinge on it. In that case, I believe I used a piece of brass for the pin, not a wooden dowel. But you can get from, I think like Lee Valley, you can get a dowel maker, and it's a very robust steel plate with a bunch of holes in it, and you get the material close, and then I think you just drive it through, and you're shearing off the excess. That's the get it close part. You're shearing off the excess to form a dowel to whatever size you're trying to make. Not something, obviously, you can tell by the way I'm describing the process. I've never done it, but I've seen it done. I've seen other people do it. So it's possible. I think there's also, I feel like I've seen kind of like a pencil sharpener on steroids, where it's a cutter inside a negative, and you put your material in a cordless drill. You find a way to fasten the blank to a cordless drill, and then you go, and you run it through this negative, and it comes out a dowel on the other side. That one, I can't remember if that was a commercially made product or something that somebody just made for themselves because they wanted to make their own dowels. But I think Google is your friend here. And if you look, I'm going to take 1 second and do this. Hold, please. So I just Googled dowel maker, and hang on, it's loading. I think my iPad is thinking very slowly. Yeah, it showed a thing on Amazon called a dowel maker. Here's one. Here's a Veritas dowel maker. So yeah, Veritas has one. So there you go. If you try Googling dowel maker like I just did, and you're going to get some results. about halfway through, so a couple shameless promotions. One, big thank you to Typebond for supporting us. Two, grab the bottle opener plans. Three, be sure that you're watching your email for live stream stuff happening in April and May. There's going to be a Mother's Day event in April. You're going to want to watch that. Then in May, for the live Q&A, I'm going to have a guest with me. Ryan is a very cool guy, really good at what he does. More information on that as we get closer. But again, just pay attention to your emails as we get into April and May to watch for those two live streams. They're going to be very fun. John says, I'm thinking of making a set of open trays, 15 inches wide, 0 inches long. Interesting. I think there's supposed to be some other number in there. With 100-pound extension slides. Is there a rule for estimating weight capacity if I use 3/4 sides and bottom versus 1/2-inch ply all around? Oh, so like weight capacity of the drawer. So I think what we're talking about is like you would see this in a kitchen. I did it in our kitchen. Trays that pull out in base cabinets so that you're not crawling on your knees seeing what's in the base cabinets. You're pulling the whole pull out. So it's an interesting question. How much stronger would a 3/4 sides and bottom be than 1/2-inch sides and bottom? I don't know. I've never run into this before. I can tell you what I did on the trays I made is I used 1/2-inch Baltic birch for the sides, 3/4-inch melamine for the bottoms. So you've heard me say this before. What I like about melamine is that I don't have to finish it, and it's a nice wipeable surface. It's very bright inside the cabinet. So I love that for the tray bottoms. Baltic birch is a very robust, multi-ply plywood, is a very robust plywood. So the screws coming from the slides into that Baltic, I think you're gonna have a really good grip. At the end of the day, so I'm thinking about these 100-pound slides, and I'm trying to envision what would it take to get a pull-out tray to collapse completely, to just absolutely fail because the wood fractured. And so not that the slides failed, but that the tray failed. I just can't picture what would make that happen, even built with 1/2-inch sides and like I did the 3/4-inch bottom. I would say if you're looking to put something really heavy in these and really push them to their limit, you can't go wrong with 3/4. I would do a little bit more poking around on the interwebs just to see if you can find an industry standard someplace where somebody says, this material, this weight load, this material, this weight load. But in everything I've done, every drawer I've ever made, they've always been 1/2-inch sides, but in some cases 3/4-inch bottoms for what that's worth. Monty says, preference for making stop dados for bookshelves, handheld router table, or table scope. Let me re-grammar this. What is your preference for making stop dados for bookshelves? Handheld router table, table saw. Tips for making sure spacing is even and the same on both sides. So a stopped dado it's hard to do it on a table saw with the dado head for a bunch of reasons. One is that when you stop, that dado ramps toward the surface. Where with a router bit, when you're routing and you stop, you have a distinct vertical stopping point. So if I were to do this, I would in all likelihood do it with a handheld router and a jig at the bench. Trying to get uniform spacing like you are, I would incorporate that into the jig, which would be I cut stop dado number 1. Now I've got a gizmo on the jig that registers me to that dado when I set up for the next one. So I'm not measuring and marking, measuring and marking, measuring and marking. I'm using the jig I made to step from this dado to this dado to this dado to make sure that they're all the same. I think that would be the easiest way. John says, how do you adjust the fence on your bandsaw for blade drift? Long answer, which I believe we have covered it a lot of. I know I've covered this in a lot of videos. So I jump on WWGOA.com, WWGOA.com, and search bandsaw blade drift. There are a number of steps to it, and there's no way I'm going to be able to explain it and talk as effectively as you can watch it in a video. Fiona says, looking at the bottle opener plans, what is the diameter of a quarter? I am in Australia and looking at a comparable size coin for the second type of bottle opener. What a great question. So we dropped the ball on that, producing that PDF, trying to think if I have, this might be Googleable, but as luck would have it, I have a quarter. Fiona, do you want to know in millimeters or in inches? So I'll give you both. This quarter is 0.957 inches. Oh, please. I don't know. Is Australia imperial or metric? Metric. I don't even know. 24.3 millimeters. Great question. Dennis says, have you used leather dye on wood? No. Should I? I do a lot of leather work, and I've got leather dye. Is it cool? Now that you're saying that, I think it could be really cool. I did a leather bowl, and I dyed it red, and I'm thinking that was a pretty cool, like kind of a burnt dark red. That could be a pretty cool tone for the right piece of wood. I'm going to try it. No, I've never done it. William says, how do you sand interior corners of boxes between coats of aquathane? So any interior corner is a pain to get to. So one, anytime that you can finish before you assemble, that's a great thing for this reason. Other than that, between coats, you just got to work your way in there with a sanding sponge or something that's going to allow you to get into the corner. There's no magic silver bullet to that. It's just a little bit of a pain, and you just got to work your way in with your sanding, with your abrasive. Carton says, what do you think about using gel stain as opposed to regular stain? I have used very, very little gel stain. And I can tell you the one application, or the application where I've done it, has been when I've worked with poplar. And poplar is a wood that has colors all over the map. It can be green with purple stripes and all this weird stuff. Gel stain tends to sit on the surface more so than penetrate, more so than soak it. As a result, if you're trying to mask a look, gel stain is good for that. So on poplar, the gel stain was translucent enough. I could still see the grain of the poplar. But it's opaque enough that it was masking the green and the purple and all these weird variations that the poplar had. So I liked it for that. In everyday use, so for me, I'm not much of a staining wood kind of a guy. If I want the thing to be brown when I'm done, I make it out of walnut. If I want it to be white when I'm done, I make it out of maple. If I want it to be red, I make it out of cherry. So it's very infrequent for me to use stain. when I am using, I can tell you there is no gel stain in my finishing cabinet at this moment. I couldn't tell you the last time I used it. I think that a standard stain soaking in is going to let us see more of the wood, give us a little bit more natural look. Look, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that gel stains initial inception was for entry doors that are made not from steel but from they're like plasticky sort of. Now I'm losing the word, but that's gel stains were used in that application because you had a thing that had wood grain embossed in it. You had this fake wooden door that was really plastic or whatever it was, fiberglass probably, and it had this wood grain embossed in it. So when you put gel stain on it, it let you see the embossed wet wood grain while it was imparting color to the fiberglass door. So again, what I don't like about it is its extreme opacity, but if you need to mask a color, like I had to do with poplar, it works for that. Robert says, a pattern bit follows every little nuance on the edge of the pattern. How do you get a perfectly fair edge to a homemade pattern? You make it on your CNC. Sorry, but that is my answer in this shop. You need to you got to put the time in and work it and work it and work it. So you've got it. It's a very good point, which is any whoop-de-doos that you have in a pattern, if you're using a pattern bit or a flush trim bit, will telegraph to your final project. So what that comes down to is that you need to make your pattern as accurate and as flowing curve-y as you can. So a solution for you might be, is there somebody in your area you can contact that could CNC cut patterns for you so that you know that everything is dead on? In the absence of that, it's just, in my experience, pre-CNC, making things very, very meticulously so that you don't have any highs and lows and you're not going to telegraph any bad spots to your project. Tim says, what would you use to fix a stripped out wood screw hole with some blowout on one side of the screw hole? Is there a product that could fill in the hole and blow out and still hold the screw? Well, something like, it depends on the aesthetic you're after when this is all done. I would think a product like Bondo, auto body filler, would certainly fill the hole. Rock hard, Durham rock hard, which is that powder you mix with water, gets extremely hard. That would certainly fill the hole. You could chase that then with a new screw, because that's certainly going to hold threads when it's in, if that gives you the aesthetic you want. The other thing could be, it just depends on the application. Do you need to drill the whole thing out and put a plug in there, a Dutchman, and then kind of you're starting over with the screw? So Bondo could work. Durham rock hard could work. Those would all hold threads. Epoxy maybe could work. That would probably hold threads. Or bore the whole thing out and put a plug in. Have you ever worked with tallow? A friend told me he builds lots of stuff out of it. I've never seen it in a store or magazine article. Well, tallow, in my limited experience, is like, don't we make soap and candles out of that? It's fat, like from sheep or something. Now I got to Google again. Are you saying it's a type of wood? TALLOW. Never heard of it. So, tallow wood is endemic to Australia, and it's a eucalyptus. So I have worked with eucalyptus. When I lived in Africa, Peace Corps, that it was filthy. Swaziland was filthy with eucalyptus trees, gum trees they called them. And they were not native. They had been brought in to plant in order to grow dimensional stuff, structural stuff for mines. It's very, very strong. So I worked with it a little bit. I liked it. There was very close grain. The stuff there, the stuff in Swaziland had, kind of a pinkish, reddish tone to it. It was very pretty. I don't know if that's the same genus as what we're talking about here with tallow wood, but it was neat. It was a very interesting wood. Another sidebar to the trees is they soak up water out of the ground like crazy. So it's not necessarily a positive byproduct because they soak up so much groundwater. So yes is the answer, but I just never heard it called tallow wood. Somebody on YouTube says, I use a diamond stone key ring to sharpen and clean router bits. Yeah, so I think you'd want to clean before you sharpen. A diamond stone is a way to sharpen carbide router bits, but if there's any resin or sap on there, you want to get that off first because it would tend to clog up your stone. Would a wooden dowel squeak in a hinge? Great question. Maybe, but you could put a little wax on there, a little paste wax or paraffin on there, and that would stop that. Jeff says, I've got limited space in my garage and I've stood up my wood stock. Can you give me recommendations when having to do this, please? Recommendations in regard to, I have limited shop space. I've stood up my wood stock. Give me a recommendation. Are you talking about like just being careful about standing up wood stock? Keep it as vertical as possible. If that's the question, keep it as true vertical as possible. So if it sits like this for a period of time, you might introduce a bow to it because it's sagging against the wall. So if it's gonna stand against the wall, keep it as true vertical as you can. Dennis says, I have taken old flea market bottle can openers, removed the plastic handle, and made a much bigger handle using pretty wood. Great idea. Yeah, it seems like a cool. I feel like it's been a while since I looked at that bottle opener thing. But I feel like one of the projects in there was disassembling an existing bottle opener and making it cooler by making your own handle. But I'm not, Dennis's idea is good too. Gene says, what's a good software to use when drawing project plans? I use SketchUp all the time. SketchUp is amazing. So my story with that, everything has a story. And my story with that was a bunch of years ago for a video project, I was doing a dresser that was a stack of drawers. Prior to this, literally for decades, for my entire woodworking life, I would plan stuff out in my head. Maybe I would hand draw a sketch, but for the most part, I would think it through, how I wanted to make it, come into the shop, start cutting wood, build a thing. The downside of that is it doesn't always quite come out the way you want it to come out. With the stack of drawers, what I was up against was the drawers were of varying heights. And I wanted to make sure that the stack was going to look okay when it was done. First time I used SketchUp expressly for that purpose was to draw the whole thing out and dimension these drawers in software before I dimensioned them over there on my table saw. That was 10 years ago, maybe more, and I've been using it ever since. So there's a version of SketchUp that's free. I use the paid version. I use SketchUp Pro, which is a limitation on what I do because plans that come from the work I do are sold through WWGOA.com. If you're monetizing the work, you have to use SketchUp Pro. There's a free version of it. It's very powerful that you can use. Because so many people use it, there are lots and lots and lots of tutorial videos out there. That's how I learned to use it. What I would recommend is watch some tutorials and then very quickly pick a project you want to draw and start to draw that project. The reason being that will make it meaningful. That'll make the learning process meaningful to you. If you're just like randomly learning SketchUp and you're not applying it, it's not going to stick. So it's worth taking something you've already done and changing that, making that into a SketchUp drawing. But I think SketchUp is a wonderful tool. And what's cool about it, you'll get used to it. You're basically building in the software the same way you're going to build in your shop. Piece by piece, you're putting the project together. And just like to take this to the next level, my kid recently asked about doing built-ins at her house. And so I very quickly drew the walls of her living room. And then we were able to plunk in, what if we do cabinets like this? What if we do cabinets like this? So the other thing that's a huge benefit to it is a flexibility of looking at different options. You can draw the whole thing and you can tell it it's oak or curly maple or bird's eye maple or whatever, so that the project you've drawn is actually going to look like the material that you're going to use. So it's a great way to go. Frank says, how many coats of aqua coat do you use on porous woods like mahogany? So it's not, the selected number of coats isn't incumbent on the porosity of the wood. It's more on getting the build I want. So I'm going to be a base coat of seal coat or two, then generally 2 coats of top coat over the seal coat. If what you're looking at with a wood like mahogany is that it's porous and it's open grain, and you want it to be a nice, like truly flat surface when you're done, that's grain filler. So if you didn't see that, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we did a live stream that was all about grain filler. Mahogany needs to get grain filler on it before you do the seal coat, before you do the top coat. That way you're going to get that flat surface. No amount of build from aqua coat is going to give you that flat surface. Dennis says, Rex used ebony leather dye on wood to get a superior deep ebony color. I'm going to try it. Rex. So I don't know who Rex is, but it sounds cool. I mean, it's a stain, it's a dye, right? So I'm going to try that. All right. Well, we have, at least at this second, reached the end of questions right there. So we've got about 5 minutes to go if any other questions come in. But again, I'm going to visit a number of things. 1, thanks to Typon. 2, grab that download for making bottle openers, and you can be the hero at the next barbecue when you show up and give the hosting family their very own homemade bottle opener. 3, watch upcoming live events. We've got some cool stuff coming up. One of the 11 o'clock lives is going to be leaning into Mother's Day. And then our Q&A live in May, I'm going to have a guest on that. And spoiler alert, the topic is going to be making money from your woodworking. Ryan is a rock star on this topic. And if you're looking to monetize your shop and be smarter about doing that, you definitely want to catch the live when Ryan is here in May. So watch email for that. Doug says, where do you get the free software for SketchUp? Just Google it. Google SketchUp. And you'll go to SketchUp's page, and all the information is there about the software and the plans and the stuff. Everything is there. Oh, there's another one. Any experience using zebra wood? Recommendations for finish. So yeah, I've used zebra wood In fact, I just got done cutting a bunch of it. I don't think I've done anything funky when I finished it. I think I've always finished it with my standard finish, but it is a porous wood, which takes us back to a great first step on that would be grain filler, so that you're filling in that porosity. And then from there, I would stick with, again, in my case, base coat of seal coat, top coat of aquathane, and go from there. But other than that, I don't think I've ever done anything unusual I don't think I followed a protocol for zebra wood that isn't what I normally do for my projects. John says, how wide should the recess on a bowl be in relationship to the diameter of the bowl? Well, one, we're talking about my best subject when I was in school, which is recess. Two, I think what we're talking about is if you've got a 4-jaw chuck and you're putting a recess in the bottom, that then you're going to expand the jaws into that recess to hold the bowl. Here's what I'm going to say. Here's going to be my bailout. Because I'm going to say, I don't know. But I'm going to bet that chuck manufacturers have a proportion for this, which would be use this chuck, which expands to this size maximum, this size minimum, on this size bowl. I do this all the time, and I just do it. I've turned a lot of bowls, and I do it intuitively, but I don't have a number in my head. It's a great question. Like if the diameter is X, the recess in the bottom should be no smaller than some part of X. But I don't know what that is. But I'm guessing that people who make lathe chucks, Easy Wood as an example, have that information and we'll be able to give you a hard number, a proportion that I don't have in my head. Well, folks, I believe we are there. We've run out of questions. It works out because it's 4:58. It's almost 5 o'clock. So again, watch for those coming live streams. There's some cool stuff coming up in April and May. Other than that, we have reached the end. And Max, you can check us out.